Have you ever wondered if the narrators you listen to have their own scary stories? Well, get ready. In this video, myself, among many other horror narrators, share our own personal scary stories. I'm going to be sharing multiple stories of my own, while everyone else will each share one. Every narrator's channel will be linked in the description. Now, if you're all ready to get this started, let's begin. I'm Southern Cannibal, and these are my personal scary stories. This first story happened to me when I was a child, around 10 years old I'd say. To give a little background of how I was as a kid, I was a very rebellious and curious child. I loved playing outside and wandering around when my family wasn't paying attention. Anytime we'd go to a store or anything, I always took off to look at toys and games and do my own thing. That's just the kind of kid I was. Now for the actual story. I spent a great deal of my life living with my grandparents. One day my grandfather asked me to retrieve the mail for him and my grandma. Me being a hard-headed and bratty kid, I didn't really want to, but I did it anyways because, I'm the kid, they're the adults. What can you do? So I went outside to retrieve the mail, and as I was getting it out of the mailbox, an odd scraggly looking man pulls up next to me in a red rusty pickup truck. He begins to roll down his passenger side window to show me a photo of a missing dog, to which he then asks if I've seen it around anywhere in the neighborhood. Now, I was a pretty naive child. I was totally aware of stranger danger, as I watched a lot of America's Most Wanted and other crime shows. But in this instance, I distinctly remember not really being creeped out at all by this man. Where things take a turn is when he then begins to ask me if I'd like to hop in his truck and go for a ride with him to help him find his dog. I remember in that exact moment actually contemplating on what I was going to do. I was seriously considering getting in this stranger's truck and helping him find his dog. In that very moment of contemplation, my grandmother stepped outside, noticing the strange man and the pickup truck, and she begins to call out to me to come inside, as she knew the man was up to no good, and in that instant, the man in the truck instantly took off and drove away, never to be seen or heard from ever again. I know this isn't your typical scary story where I ended up hurt or chased with a knife, but I did almost get abducted. And as a child, that's one of the worst things that could ever possibly happen to you. So I'm really glad my grandmother came outside when she did, and I don't want to even imagine what could have happened if she didn't. This next one isn't really that scary, but more just strange and creepy. I've had a lot of fans and people ask me if I've ever had any weird or creepy run-ins with fans, in person or online. And usually, I say no. But I did have a very weird experience about a month and a half ago. If you've been watching my latest live streams, you probably already know that my girlfriend is pretty present on my channel lately. She goes by the username Cannibal. She's extremely supportive of my channel. From the videos to my live streams, pretty much all aspects of my channel. So I had this fan who randomly started showing up to my streams and commenting on my videos. Not a big deal. As a YouTuber, we get new people all the time. That's normal. Let's call this fan Ellie. Ellie was a bit of a creeper, if you will. Shortly after coming to my live streams, she eventually joined my Discord server. For those of you who don't know, Discord is kind of like Skype, but better. You can have full chat rooms, voice chats, etc. I created my server to interact with fans, obviously. Ellie began to get a little too friendly, if you will. She would only talk on the server when I was around, and most of the time she would ask a lot of personal questions about me and my girlfriend. She would ask things like, how did we meet, how long have we been together, what my girlfriend looks like, where she worked, her eye color, etc. While these questions might not seem like a very big deal and may come off as harmless, Ellie would only ask these types of questions. That's it. It was always about me and my relationship with my girlfriend. She would also constantly ask me to post selfies in the selfies chat of my server. For those of you who are confused, I haven't done a full face reveal yet, but every now and then I'll post partial face reveals on my Snapchat story or Instagram and Twitter. So I guess she was expecting me to post some on my server as well. I actually did end up posting a few, and every time I did, Ellie was there to be super creepy and flirtatious. At some point, one of my mods gave her a bit of a hard time, posting thought memes and whatnot, too, which kinda ran Ellie off. She stopped coming to the server altogether. I honestly felt bad in the way things were handled, but at least now I wouldn't have to deal with this weirdo fan constantly flirting with me and asking personal questions about me and my relationship with my girlfriend. So I carried on. Well, that wasn't the end of Ellie. She continued to come to my live streams and would send kissy emojis and still be flirtatious and continue asking the strange questions about me and my girlfriend. It hit a point to where anytime I posted a new video on Twitter or made a tweet, Ellie was the first one to like it and reply. And her reply was always a weird kissy emoji, always something of a flirting nature. After talking to my girlfriend about it in depth, we both decided that I needed to reach out to Ellie and let her know that her actions were beginning to weird both of us out, and she needed to stop. So I decided to DM her on Twitter. I confronted Ellie in the most respectable way possible. I told her that the things she had been writing and the strange personal questions were weirding me out, and that neither me or my girlfriend appreciated. I asked her if she could please stop with the strange behavior. I let her know that I really appreciate her as a fan and a supporter, but that I would really like her to put an end to the weirdness and the flirting. Well, Ellie pretty much acted like I was out of my mind and she had no clue what I was talking about. She went on a little aggressive rant on how she's never met me or seen my whole face, so how could she possibly like me or have any feelings for me? At this point, I honestly felt stupid and like a total jackass. I felt like I kind of alienated a fan, and I apologized to Ellie for possibly misreading the whole situation. This was another instance when I was totally naive, but I try to always be nice. That's just how I am. After I apologized, Ellie told me she was sorry for making me feel uncomfortable, and she never meant any actual harm to my relationship. She told me that she wouldn't be coming to my server or live streams anymore, as well as she wouldn't be commenting on my videos or posts anymore. I felt horrible about this, but I told her that I understood and again that I was sorry if I misread things. That was the end of it, or so I thought. Although I did feel bad, I thought at least now I can finally get some peace without dealing with this whole situation anymore. Well, once again, I thought wrong. A few days later, Ellie was there again posting her infamous kissy emojis to my tweets. At this point, I just ignored her. I had enough of her weirdness, and I wasn't going to even bother with it anymore at all. A few days later, I get a few messages from Ellie on Twitter. Ellie had gotten drunk. I'm talking completely wasted. She had sent me a ton of weird messages, some of sexual nature. She began to say things like how great of a cook she is and how great she is at oral sex. Me trying to be respectful though, I try not to take her behavior too serious. I knew she was probably only behaving this way because she was drunk, but then she started saying negative and hurtful things about my girlfriend. Things like she's probably not as pretty as her, asking what does my girlfriend have that she doesn't, which is kinda funny because I told her me when she asked that. But anyways, as I was saying, she just started to say a lot of messed up and rude things about my girlfriend. Because Ellie was drunk, I kind of let it slide. I told her to have a good rest of her night and to try and sleep off the drunkenness. Well, the next day arrived, and what do you know? Ellie regretted all of the things she said to me and gave me an apology, to which I naively accepted. I told her it was okay, but she probably shouldn't drink too much if she can't contain herself. She told me that I was right and apologized once again for her drunken and inappropriate behavior. I thought that was finally it. This is finally over. I told Ellie to have a good day and carried on with the rest of mine. So one night I decided to do a live stream on my channel with my girlfriend. I wanted to introduce my girlfriend to my fans, as she's been a pretty big support system for me, and I wanted to kinda show her off. She has an adorable and sweet personality, and I thought it would be fun to do a stream together and have fans ask us questions. The stream actually went pretty normal. Nothing eventful really happened. That is, until after the stream was over. A few hours later, I logged onto Twitter to see a message from Ellie. I really wanted to pull my hair out at this point. I opened the message to see that she once again is insulting my girlfriend. She had sent me a message saying my girlfriend is boring and that's why some of my fans ignored her. She also added a lovely snake emoji along with her message. It makes sense though. She was definitely pretty damn snake-like. After that, I replied back telling her that is not okay and that I'm officially done with her games. I told her that I wouldn't be replying to any of her messages anymore, and to have a good one. Ellie replied one last time. Well, when you guys break up, you know where to find me. I didn't reply and I blocked her shortly after. That was finally the end of that hellacious experience with Ellie. I appreciate my fans more than you know, but no one has the right to pull the things that Ellie did. So yeah, that's my first strange experience with a fan. And hopefully, the last.
My channel is Stories After Midnight, and this is my personal scary story. First off, as some of you may know, but I wouldn't be surprised if no one knows either, I'm a Christian. Normally that wouldn't matter in a situation like this, but I think it sets up a little bit of context for what happened to me about 7 years ago. I had just begun college for the first time, and I was quite nervous about it. The nerves of going back to school were getting the better of me and keeping me from sleeping. There were a lot of restless nights thinking about what college would be like, if I was going to make friends or who they were and all that fun stuff no one likes to think about late at night. During the first week of school, which I believe the first day was around the middle of the week, I began reading my Bible a lot. Every night I'd read for an hour or so, getting lost in the stories it told, while I tried to paint a picture of the scenes in my mind. It was in hopes that it would help calm my nerves, and generally I think it's a good idea to give it a read. For 5 straight days, since I began reading it, I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't for the same reason as before. Each night was different, yet it was the same in the sense that I would be tormented by demons, trying to dissuade me from continuing to read, and just generally to torment me. The first night was very odd. You know, like we've all had those weird feelings that I'm being watched and typical stuff like that, probably due to the fact that you're watching a horror movie at 1 a.m. However, this was real, and it was terrifying. My bed was situated in the corner of my room, beneath a window. Typically, I lay on my right side, which would have me facing my wall, leaving my back to the rest of the room. It was when I turned around where this incredible sense of dread and the feeling of being watched was the most intense. More often than not, I would find myself turning around over my shoulder and peeking to see if there was indeed anything there. I eventually became tired enough to the point where I'd end up falling asleep. That's it. And that'd be the end of it. I'd just fall asleep and there we go. Move forward a day, and it's again nighttime, as was the theme of these events. If anything was going to happen, it was going to be at night while I'm trying to sleep. Or, I kid you not, I would be woken up at 3:30 a.m. on the dot. As I was sitting there in my bed, watching TV, the Weather Network to be exact, I liked their background music. Generally, more often, I would fall asleep with the Weather Channel on, and their background music just kind of lulled me into a nice sleep and just drowned out the noise and kind of filled the space. And while I was doing that, I felt this feeling of, now, trying to describe it is always hard, but a feeling of dread, of course. I think it's the best way to explain it, mixed in with anger. I had no energy for anything. If you were to look at me, I'm sure it would have looked like you just backed into my new car, and I was less than pleased with you. It became overwhelming, and I knew something was wrong, so I texted my friend to tell him what was going on. Then eventually it passed, and that was it for night number 2. On night number 3, I was sleeping soundly until I was woken up by what felt like a ton of textbooks being dropped on my head. It was weird, because it didn't hurt, but in my subconscious, I heard a bang and then woke up seeing stars, with a pressure in my head that felt like I had indeed just been slugged with something. And being 3:30 in the morning, I didn't stay up too late after that as I passed back out. But nonetheless, I knew something happened and I knew it wasn't normal. I ended up feeling my head, looking around, and just making sure I was okay before I fell back to sleep, because it was the strangest thing. I'm sure you've had it where, if someone knocks while you're sleeping, you hear it in your subconscious and you wake up knowing what was going on. And that's basically what happened. Now, night number 4 was the strangest of the 5 days. At 3:30 a.m., I woke up to a literal punch to my chest through my mattress. I remember it so vividly. It was as if the strongest man alive, times about 100, was laying under my bed, face up, and somehow gained enough momentum to drive their fist through my box spring, pillow top mattress, foam top layer, and into my chest. It awoke me so abruptly, but again, even though I was sleeping, I knew what happened, and it freaked me right out. At this point, I had no idea if it was going to escalate further and what that next event would be, since I was just assaulted in my own bed. Believing what I believe, though, I knew what was really going on, and I knew that demons wanted attention, so I didn't give it any. To make myself feel better, I shifted over in my bed, ignoring what happened, and went back to sleep. With the last night fresh in my mind, I finished my school day and was heading to bed. After fighting through intense feelings of I'm being watched, I fell asleep, but only to wake up to my bed violently shaking at the prime time of 3:30 a.m. Thankfully, it didn't happen long, but when I woke up and it was still shaking, I was worried. I had thought that maybe my guitar fell and knocked into my bed as it was leaning on my night table, but it was perfectly upright. At this point, I had early mornings because of school and I was beyond irritated with what was going on. I just wanted to sleep and be left alone without being woken up every morning. But where I was usually left alone to sleep after suffering through events like I had been experiencing, this is not where it ended. However, the next event wasn't so terrible. When I woke up that morning, I tossed aside my sheets. Having gone through all this crap and still reading my Bible despite all the objections, this is where perseverance prevailed. Anyway, tossed off my blankets, and as I was getting out of bed, from right beside me, I heard a deep, audible sigh. That still gives me goosebumps as I explain it. It was out of nowhere and loud enough to avoid being mistaken for something else. And that was it. That audible sigh was what I believe a sign of defeat. After that 5th night, nothing ever happened again. Not even to this day. But those string of days were the scariest I've experienced in my lifetime. And I hope it stays that way.
I'm Nightmare Files, and this is my personal scary story. I will not use any names in this, at least not the real names. We had already been in Afghanistan for 2 weeks at this point, and our FOB had been attacked at least 6 times already. If you don't know what a FOB is, it's a forward operating base. It was a very small blackout FOB, and we call it blackout because at night, we couldn't have any lights on outside due to indirect fire or sniper fire. Anyways, a week goes by and nothing happens. So our company is being told that we're doing a mission together, a company mission. Usually we had gone on missions at the platoon level, which is one level under company. By this time of deployment, we had been on a few key leader engagements, and nothing much happened. The only contact we received was at the FOB. But a lot of us had a bad feeling about this one. To make a long story short, and we ended up going on mission, and we moved on foot about 2 kilometers to the east at around 1 a.m., and we set up our patrol base at around 3 a.m., and then sent out each platoon to their own sector. Each platoon moved a few kilometers away, while headquarters stayed at our patrol base. I'm on the radio talking with our forward observers from each platoon, and they're reporting up that they can hear the enemy, but they can't see them. At this point, it's still dark, and we are basically in the backyard of the enemy, and this area is known for the Taliban. These guys are freaking out on the radio, as they keep saying the Taliban is out there, but we can't see them. Then at our patrol base, some local man walks up and our interpreter ends up talking to him. As he's speaking to the interpreter is telling us everything he's saying. At this point, I'm holding my weapon pointed down to the ground, and I slip my finger to the trigger. And I look at the interpreter, with him not knowing that I understand everything he's saying. I tell him, that's not what he's saying, while looking him straight in the eyes. My commander looked at me and said, what? I repeated, that's not what he's saying. The interpreter is lying. The interpreter was telling us that this guy wanted food and water. What he was really saying is that there's Taliban all around us, and they outnumber us. And they knew about everything we were doing before we even came out here, and that they're going to attack us and our fob. At this point, the interpreter looks at me with wide eyes and starts to run toward his bag. As the interpreter is running toward his bag, he screams, Allah Akbar. When he reached in his bag, he grabbed a detonator, and he squeezed it, and then, boom. He had a bomb in the middle of our patrol base, but it only injured a few of us. He was immediately shot, and all hell broke loose. Shots are coming from everywhere, but we can't pinpoint where. Immediately, 7 people were shot. I got down next to my commander, and I'm on my radio talking to my forward observers, who are trying to call in artillery and mortars. I'm trying to aim my weapon, but can't tell who is who because it's so dark. We have on night vision, but they suck. Guys are screaming that they are hit, and some guys are cowering behind boulders. Then over the radio I hear, I'm not going to use his real name, Sergeant Smith is down. Luckily at this point the sun is starting to come up, and a few of us run over to where Sergeant Smith was, and I saw him. I saw Sergeant Smith, face down and not moving. The medic and I grab and drag him. My buddy was right next to him, and he saw Sergeant Smith's face when we turned him over. And he started crying and freaking out because his face looked like he was screaming, but it was just stuck there. I stopped for a second when I saw his face, but I snapped right out of it. This wasn't my first deployment. This wasn't my first dead body. Sergeant Smith was one of those guys that was really untouchable, an alpha male, very in shape and had everything going for him. When the guys saw that he was killed, they definitely thought that they were next because he was like a super soldier to these guys. I asked my buddy, where did he see the enemy? Where's the Taliban? And he pointed and said, 10 meters that way. I thought to myself, 10 meters? That means that they're inside our patrol base now. I pause and I look around. I never seen so many self-proclaimed tough guys turn into little girls so quick, and so many guys that didn't believe in God start praying for God. I will not go into everything else because it's pretty hard for me. Just know that some of us had to fight with our hands because the enemy was so close to us. We only lost 1 guy that day, but we had 18 people wounded. 13 of those people were shot, but everyone was mentally wounded. And still are. We all thought that we were untouchable because we jumped out of planes, knew how to fight, and lifted weights. Everyone is a tough guy until they have to do tough guy shit.
My channel is Vitus22, and this is my scary story. This happened a few months ago, after the end of the frigid weather we've all grown accustomed to here. I was sitting in my living room, shooting the shit with my sister, and we both heard a bang from down the hall, in her and her fiancé's bedroom. That wouldn't be a raise for concern for the most part. It could have been the water heater, or one of the animals. Nothing to worry about. We went back to talking, speculating the afterlife and the views and beliefs of different religions, when a loud growl from down the hall rattled our bones. "What the hell was that?" she asked me. I wasn't sure what to make of it, so I slowly crept towards my room to grab a knife to defend myself with. This is when I caught a glimpse of the apparition. it stood at the doorframe of her room, staring at me, while her fiancé was sound asleep on the other side of it. It was a tall, gray figure with long black hair covering its face. It had thin appendages and no discernible clothing. I thought my peripheral vision was playing tricks on me, and when I turned to face the thing head-on, it was gone. From there, my memory gets a bit blurry. I remember staring down that dark hallway, my vision adjusting in and out of the bare nothingness I was trying to identify. I was actually petrified. For the first time in my life, something had terrified me so much that it kept my muscles from responding to my brain. The sound of my sister trying desperately to bring me back to reality was muffled and nearly unintelligible. "Matthew," she urged. I turned back to her in a daze. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I grabbed the knife from my room, and after an excruciatingly long 2 minutes of waiting for my heart to slow down, I told her my experience in vivid detail. I tried to get her to understand it as desperately as I myself wanted to. She was stunned from what I could remember, looking at me in concern with wide eyes. The adrenaline in my body kept my body wired, frantically moving my body at any little noise or movement I noticed. Whatever that thing was, I had a feeling it wasn't just passing through. After a minute or so of composing herself, my sister finally spoke. It may have been a message, maybe saying that it can get to our family, and there's nothing we can do about it. If I were you, I'd sleep with one eye open. Something about that was indescribably terrifying. It's like pondering the idea that someone you're close to is going to die. You don't know how or when, and there isn't a damn thing you can do to stop it from happening. No matter how much I beat my chest or try to suppress the idea of the entity entirely, the difference it would make would be infinitesimal. For months afterward, we referred to the creature as Long Fingers, and kept any more sightings of it quiet from her fiancé. We acted as if life were normal, and there wasn't something creeping around in the shadows. We have thoroughly cleaned the house of anything supernatural since that event, and we have not had sightings of it ever since.
My name's Goodnite Goosebumps, and this is my personal true story. So, this happened when I was around 13. I was living in Virginia, in the back of this subdivision that was surrounded by woods. It's a pretty rural area, and the woods around the house I was staying in were pretty thick. Kind of creepy, honestly. Like, it gave off this isolated vibe. This house was actually the only house I knew in the subdivision that had a private entrance to the main road. Everyone else had to drive to the front gate of the community and pass the security booth, although at the time it wasn't manned. This private driveway was a small unkempt concrete lane that wove about half a mile through that creepy ass mass of trees. Needless to say, we pretty much avoided it. Even creepier, about 3/4 of the way toward the road, were a couple of abandoned houses. They were really run down. One was basically 3 walls of what looked to once be a small ranch-style house. The other, in considerably better condition, still had a massive hole in the side of it, in the second of its 3 floors. A couple of rusted cars sat on their rims at the side of each house. They didn't seem to be extremely old or anything. They looked similar to the style of house we were living in at the time. They just looked like they'd been abandoned for a long time. So, one summer day, my friend Javon and I are at my house, complaining about how bored we were and shooting down each other's suggestions on what to do. We decide that ice cream sounds like the best idea, and then we realize that we're both 13 and we have no one to give us a ride the 5 miles or so to Dairy Queen. Completely unrelated, Uber's dope. Anyway, We reasoned that it'd be extremely time and effort consuming to walk the extra 3 or 4 miles to the front and out to the main road, and hesitantly decided to take the private driveway. It was like 3 in the afternoon, so I wasn't really worried about it. Honestly, I was a little more concerned with getting back while it was still light. The last thing I wanted to do was walk down country roads in the dark, let alone a creepy wooded driveway. So, we start off, and are just talking, power walking through the July heat in their pursuit of ice cream. The trees actually cooled the area down a lot, so that was awesome. It was just so thick in there that I remember telling Javon, "Dude, there's no way anyone could hear you screaming here." We reached the abandoned properties fairly quickly, and it was honestly the first time I'd seen them in person, and not just rolling by in a car. The air there was heavy, and had this bad smell too, both of which were made worse by the summer heat. It was ridiculously intense. The woods were silent, something that I learned later while hunting usually means something is around that everything in the woods is afraid of. Javon, I guess in an attempt to lighten things up, hopped on top of one of the cars and started jumping around on the roof. He hadn't jumped 3 times when something massive began to slam around inside the 2-story house. Javon and I looked at each other in horror and turned to look toward the house, while slams and scrapes continued to explode just inside the hole on the 2nd floor. I remember trying to rationalize that it could be a bear, but that idea was dashed when we saw what happened next. A huge, black shape began to fill the hole in the side of the building. What I can only describe as an arm, or a tentacle, flew out of the hole and slapped the wooden planks on the side. I was frozen in shock and horror. Less than a second later, another, what seemed to be a black tendril, emerged and reached out in what I can only pray was in our direction. Over a decade later, I saw an allegedly true video of a spider-like creature scaling the sides of buildings in Russia. It wasn't immediate, but when I thought back to this experience, I find it disturbingly similar. Javon hitting the concrete behind me snapped me from my trance, and I turned to run with him without a second glance. I was running way too hard to hear if there was any noise from the building, or even worse, behind us. We got to my back porch in what seemed like seconds. We went inside my house and sat in literal silence for probably 10 minutes before Javon abruptly said, "I have to go home," and walked out the front door. Weirdly, we didn't tell our parents. We never spoke of it again, and I never went down that driveway again. We moved a few months later, and I haven't been back since.
Hello, my channel is Being Scared, and this is my personal scary story. This happened a few months ago. My wife asked me to go to the store to grab a few things that we needed. No problem. Occasionally, when I leave the house, I'll go through the garage. So I grabbed my car keys and stepped from my kitchen into the garage. I hit the garage door button and stood there for a second waiting as it opened. I began walking through the garage and then ducked my head slightly to walk under the rising door. Then, I abruptly stopped immediately in my driveway. What stopped me? A man and a woman standing there in my driveway facing me about 2 feet away. This caught me completely off guard, as you can imagine. I had never seen these 2 people in my life. They weren't neighbors of mine. They looked as they didn't belong. The man looked as if something was bothering him, and honestly, I might have asked him what it was if I hadn't glanced at the woman and saw that she was cradling a plastic baby. She was shushing it as if it were crying. I quite literally was speechless. After a few seconds, I instinctively asked, "Can I help you?" The man looked all around him as if he were lost and said, "Can you give us a ride to the store?" I looked again at the woman, and she still, looking down, cradled and comforted her plastic baby. I responded as I walked around them to my car. "No, I can't do that." That was all I said. I didn't give a reason why, and it's ironic, because that's where I was going. But I mean, no, hell no. I narrate scary stories for a living. There was zero chance that these people were getting in my car. The man looked mad at my response, almost as if a close friend of his had turned him down for the ride, like he didn't understand why I said no. As I got into my car and started the engine, I closed the garage door and waited there while it closed completely. The whole time I sat there, the man stared at me, and the woman never looked up from the plastic baby. I kinda laughed a little bit because this was so incredibly random and bizarre. They started walking down the driveway and then down the sidewalk. I pulled out of the driveway and called my wife. She answered, "Hey, baby. Hey, make sure that the back door and the front door are locked, please. And the windows." "Why, what's wrong?" she asked. I told her what had happened, and she did what I asked her to do. I stayed on the phone with her until I got to the store and told her to call 911 if anything weird happened, and that I would be right back. Thankfully, the store was only a few minutes' drive from my house, but I couldn't stop thinking that the two people might return to my house, so I grabbed only one thing that was on the list and left as fast as I could. I called my wife back when I exited the store. "Hey, anything weird happen?" She replied, "No." We hung up, and as I was on my way home, I remembered that the man had asked for a ride to the store. Just as I remembered this, I saw them both on the sidewalk walking toward me. The woman holding the plastic baby was walking with her head down, and the man saw me and started walking into the middle of the road. I swerved and drove around them slowly. He gave me a pure look of anger as I did this, and I left them both in the rearview mirror. The two of them looked like they had just escaped an insane asylum, and it bothered me quite a bit that they knew where I lived. I called non-emergency and told a police officer what had happened. He thought it was really weird as well, and seemed disturbed. He told me that he would have a patrol car look around the area. I never saw those two people again.
I'm Bad Vibe Storytelling, and this is my personal scary story. This story takes place when I was either 18 or 19, and I am a white male. This will be important to the story. At the time, I worked a job where I would have every other weekend off, and on my weekends off, I would often go to parties with my friends, which were all Mexican. Now, my friends weren't the most outstanding of citizens. In fact, a majority were associated or were in gangs, and this led to a lot of incidents and altercations along the way. This story, however, was about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One Saturday night, my friends and I were hanging out and trying to find a party to go to. We would pretty much go to any party as long as there was alcohol and girls. So around 10 p.m., a friend texts us and tells us about this party that they were at. At this point, any party was better than what we had going on. So my three friends and I hop in the car and drive to the location. We get there, and we're about to park when we see people spilling out of the house and running to their car. My first thought was the party must have been stopped by the cops, which happens to a majority of the parties we attend. So we bust a bitch and head over to the nearby gas station to meet up with another carload of friends that were at the party. I pull up to a gas pump, and as I get out of my car, a Honda pulls up very close to me. A Mexican dude that I did not recognize hops out and pins me between my car door and the car. He is screaming at me, and I'm extremely confused at this point. Everything goes into slow motion. Some of his friends jump out of a second car, and I see a heavily tattooed dude walking up to me. At this very moment, I get punched in the temple by the dude that's yelling at me. I slowly look back at him, not sure what's going on or how I was going to get out of this. Then I look over at the fully tattooed guy. He lifts his shirt up, exposing some sort of handgun. I snap out of my slow motion trance when I hear a girl in the back of the Honda say, "That's not him." Then they just both walk away. A few minutes later, my other friends roll up, which many of them were carrying. What I assume happened was, at the party there was some sort of fight between these guys and a group of white boys, and since I am white, they thought it was me. The rest of the night was pretty cool, but to this day I wonder what would have happened if the girl hadn't said something, or if my friends would have got there a few minutes earlier. Who knows?
I'm Mr. Davis, and this is my personal scary story.
This takes place around Christmas time when I was 13 years old. Do the math, and that was around 2008. My aunt always had a way of going all out for Christmas with countless decorations, lights, and little Christmas trees. Her crowning achievement, though, was the 8-foot tree in her sunroom outside. Each year, she decorated with over 300 ornaments and what seemed like miles of light. The best part was that it rotated in the tree stand. Her house was really something around that time of year. It's important that I tell you this because I need you to understand how important this was to her. My brother and I, mostly me if we're being honest, had told her we would help her decorate that year. Neither of us had any idea what we were getting ourselves into. Over the next 3 days, I was wrapping things in garland, untangling lights, and getting things from the attic. This all took place between 8 or 9 in the morning to about 8 that night. So, yeah, a full workday. Once the day was over, I'd head home, which was within shouting distance, eat a late dinner, and attempt to go to bed. I'd say attempt because for whatever reason, my body wasn't having it. I continually drifted in and out of sleep, never really reaching that deep slumber you need to rest. I would end up staying up until 5 or 6 in the morning before finally falling out from pure exhaustion, I'm sure. This left me with about 2 to 3 hours of sleep before heading back over there and helping my aunt all day. Over those 3 days, I got maybe 8 hours of sleep. On the night of the third day, though, my body had enough. We were finished decorating, so I headed home, skipped dinner, and went straight to bed. I didn't turn on the TV, listen to music, nothing. I just went to bed. Before I knew it, I was asleep. I woke up some 12 hours later the next day. Now when I say that, I don't mean I got up, stretched, and was ready to greet the morning. I mean my body woke up. I was still in bed, not really ready to face the day, so I continued laying there. Soon after, I felt something crawl over my legs at the foot of my bed. I didn't think anything of it because our cat Gizmo loved sleeping on my dirty clothes, and my closet was right at the foot of my bed. If I weren't half asleep, my body would have recognized that it wasn't our cat Gizmo. Cats don't weigh that much. Looking back, I can only equate the feeling to someone stepping over you while you're in a sleeping bag, camping. Like I felt the blankets compress around my leg near where the steps were. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, soon after this, I felt something grabbing on my right ankle. Keep in mind, I was lying on my stomach. It wasn't a hard grab, it was actually pretty gentle, but soon it began pulling me back. Somehow my sleeping brain didn't register just how insane this whole situation was, so I just shook my foot and the feeling dissipated. Only seconds later, though, it started on my other ankle. Again, a soft grab and then a tug. My foot started lifting from the bed before again I just shook it away. Finally, I felt both of my ankles getting grabbed and the pulling began. It was a bit harder this time, but for some reason, I allowed it to go on much longer. Writing this out still gives me goosebumps to this day. My entire body began slowly moving down the bed. I know it sounds insane, but I could feel my shirt rolling up underneath me as I was being pulled closer to my closet. Finally, something in my rational mind clicked and I jolted awake and scurried to the back wall where the head of my bed was, with my knees pulled to my chest. I can still remember what I saw to this day. It was an all-white face with deep black eyes that resembled an abyss, Its mouth hung open, and it too was black as tar. It looked angry. I find it so strange that something that had no pupils could express such emotion, but I remember it looking straight at me and letting out an otherworldly scream. It was deep and rumbly while being breathy and high-pitched at the same time. It's incredibly hard to describe. I'm not afraid to admit that I screamed. Not only did I screamed for my mom. I had no idea what she would do, but at that moment, it was all I could muster. The face vanished soon after that, and I left the room. When I eventually returned, I remember looking around the doorway and into the closet to make sure it wasn't in there. Luckily, it never was. As I've grown up, I learned about sleep paralysis and thought for a while this could have been what I experienced, but I'm not sure. I was able to shake it off of me, and I've had a handful of sleep paralysis episodes later in life that were nothing like this. I'm not sure what was on the land before my uncle bought it, but I feel like there may have been something residing there. Maybe not necessarily evil, but very angry.
Hey everyone, my channel is Creepy Ghost Stories, and some of you actually may know me already as CGS. And this is my personal scary story. My story takes place back when I was a teenager. It was around the late 90s. Yes, I am old. My friend had just gotten his driver's license, and we were out celebrating a couple of towns over. And I say that because I grew up near a small town in northwest New Jersey called Johnsonburg. It's a very old town dating back to 1753 or so. And get this, the population in 2010 was 101 people. So needless to say, there wasn't much going on, ever. And being that the town was so old, it was steeped in lore of old-time gunfights and pilgrims and in much more modern years, ghosts. And there's this old story of a man called Joseph Thomas, and they called him the White Pilgrim because he always wore white clothing. And no one knows exactly why he wore it, but he did. And he visited hundreds of places east of the Mississippi. He had quite a bit of notoriety doing so. He eventually made his way to New Jersey and died after giving a sermon. You see, a wave of smallpox was devastating the area at the time. And unfortunately, the White Pilgrim succumbed to it while in Johnsonburg. And now, because the local church officials didn't like the White Pilgrim's overzealous methods of spreading the gospel, they decided to bury him not in the town's official cemetery, but in the far less respectable cemetery at the time, called Dark of the Moon. Yes, that is the actual name of it. Dark of the Moon Cemetery. Now, this is where the legend splits. Some say that the White Pilgrim haunted the area because his soul couldn't rest, so that the town people in 1846 decided to reinter his remains in the Christian cemetery, which is also called Yellow Frame Church. It's actually quite a bit away from Johnsonburg in a separate town. Or what is now a separate town, I guess. Now, the other story is that the townspeople decided to build a monument in the center of the cemetery to try to appease the ghost, and probably more so the townspeople of Johnsonburg. And the monument is a smaller obelisk that is situated away from all the other gravestones. It is said that the pilgrim's ghost was seen far less frequently after that. And the obelisk is there, although a couple years after I moved out, I think it was destroyed and maybe it was rebuilt. But it does exist. And now I remember this story so vividly, just so clearly. Here I am in my teens coming back from a friend's house really late at night, 2:35 in the morning to be exact. And it was 4 of us in my buddy's car. I'm on Alamucci Road heading out of Johnsonburg. It's kind of heading home. It was a cold November, and there was a bit of snow on the ground and almost a full moon, so I could see quite clearly. And we were heading down the hill out of Johnsonburg, and I looked to my right towards Dark of Moon Cemetery. And in the cemetery, standing near the stone obelisk of the White Pilgrim, I saw an immense, imposing, hooded figure shrouded in black rags. It must have stood 8 feet tall. I gasped, and as I did, the rest of my friends looked to see what I was looking at, and they all saw a glimpse of it. At that point, we stopped the car a few yards down the road at a stop sign, and I was absolutely shaking in terror. I'd never seen anything like that before. Never have since. My buddy Ian, who was driving at the time, was screaming, "What the hell was that?" And my other friends were screaming in the back, just yelling at us to drive. But we didn't. We sat in that car for a few long minutes and decided it would be best to take another drive-by. And so we did. We didn't see the creepy dark figure standing in the center of the cemetery again. Oh no. We saw him at the gates, closer to the road. We sped up, and we got the hell out of there. Now, I used to live on a road called Bear Creek Road, and the road bumps up against a road called Shades of Death Road. I'm not making this shit up. I mean, you can actually Google all of this. In fact, I encourage you to go on Google Maps and look this all up. You'll see where I grew up. But Bear Creek Road is only like a minute or two from the graveyard, and I live maybe a 5-minute drive from the graveyard, a bit down a ways in Bear Creek Road. I didn't sleep at all that night. In fact, the following week, I hardly slept at all. In the few months after that, I never drove down Alamuchi Road past the Dark of Moon Cemetery because I was so scared of seeing that thing again. Now let's fast forward. Months later, my parents decided to move to Pennsylvania, and I decided to move out into an apartment of my own and finish high school in New Jersey, which I did. And I even did a little college in New Jersey, but I got into some trouble with some things and decided it'd be best to move on and get serious with life. So, fast forward a couple of years, I move in with my parents in Pennsylvania for a summer before I head off to culinary school. I got a job. I was really excited about my new lease on life. But there was one thing that kept happening to me. There's one thing that just wouldn't let me go. I kept waking up at 2:35 every morning to strange events. I would wake up to my bedroom light turning on and off, my TV turning on, then turning to static. And sometimes I would hear my name being whispered in my ear. It was clear as day. Brett. Now this happened every night for a few months until I moved off to college and out of my parents' house. I don't know what I saw that night. When I tell the story, some people say it was like the Grim Reaper or something like that. And some say it was someone messing with us. Although, I don't know how that would be possible. And who would know that we would be returning that time of night? Others think it was the pilgrim. But the truth is this. I know what my friends and I saw that night. And I think a little piece of it stuck with me as I moved on in life.
I am Darkness Prevails, and this is my personal scary story. When I was 20, I hopped around from job to job, trying to pay off my car and some other debts. At a certain point, I was a manager in training at a local Subway. The place never received much business, so they were training me to be alone on the closing shift. It was often quite creepy working alone at night, but this isn't where my terror occurred. You see, my family used to live on top of a hill. I still lived at home back then. Except for the top of that hill, the rest of it was owned by a local farmer and populated by his cows. To protect his livestock, the farmer set up 2 cattle guards and a gate. Cattle guards are these shallow trenches dug into the ground and covered in bars that are easy for humans and vehicles to get over. but will entrap or even break a cow's leg if it tries to get over it. As for the gate, it was located just at the start of our property, and we were to always keep it closed. The cattle guard just below the gate was precarious. It hardly worked due to the shape of the hill causing it to fill with dirt after every rain. So we had to keep the gate closed at all times, or risk his livestock escaping. Now, every time I left for work, I'd have to pull up to that gate, get out, open it, get back in my car, pull through, get out, close the gate, then leave. It was very irritating having to repeat this every time you wanted to leave the house and every time after a long day of work. Plus, it became quite a terrifying experience after dark. As I mentioned before, I worked the closing shift. I came home after dark every night, and good God, I hated opening and closing that gate. I would nearly rather stay and sleep at Subway than deal with that gate at night. It was a week before I quit Subway for other reasons that I had a horrific experience at the gate. I came back home driving down country roads after dark, hoping that I wasn't about to see something skitter across the road in front of me, but nothing like that happened. When I came to the gate, I did as I usually did. Got out, opened the dang thing, then pulled through. I then got out to close it after that, and was just beginning to open the door to get back in my car, when I saw it, just to the side of my headlights. I didn't freeze, and I was the furthest thing from calm. Whatever it was, its skin was terribly pale, and it was mostly hidden by a nearby tree. What I could see of it was an arm about 4.5 feet long and extremely thin, reaching out from behind the tree and propping itself up on the ground, its palm flat on the soil. It looked like it was using the arm to prop up its weight and lean out from behind its cover. That's all I could take before I had the door shut and my foot on the floor. The engine roared to life as my Chevy Cobalt blew a storm of rocks behind me and took off up the hill. The worst part was the fact that my bedroom window was less than 20 yards away from where I saw this creature. Looking out of it was thick woods, but not thick enough that I couldn't see the tree just down the hill that creature had been hiding behind. It was gone now, God knows where. I don't know what it was, and I tried to convince myself that it was just a white-tailed deer's backside, but the shape was wrong, and that doesn't explain the face staring at me while I wimped out and sped away.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video and listening to all of our scary stories. Be sure to check out all of the narrators that were featured in this video in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you guys do, maybe one day I'll make a part 2 with a whole nother group of other narrators sharing their stories. And if any of you have your own personal scary stories you'd like to share with me, send it to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. And before we bring this video to a close, I'd like to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. So special shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jess, Jonathan C, Jonas B, Carrie F, Lori J, Lindsay S, Matthew B, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. All that being said, once again, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and hearing all of our stories. And I also want to wish all of you to have an awesome Valentine's Day. Have a good day, everyone. And remember to always stay